Envision this a bleak February in 2020, Dayton, Ohio. Thomas Mitchell stood shrouded in the ghost of a forgotten afternoon, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers, his thoughts a constant aching orbit around the daughter who had vanished 17 years prior. He was oblivious to the fact that in the next 5 minutes, the very axis of his world would tilt into madness. For there, nestled in the dusty window of an antique shop, between scratched vinyl and tarnished silver, was an artifact that should have been lost to time, an object that had dissolved into memory, the very same day his little girl did. And when the truth finally clawed its way to the surface, it was a darkness more profound than any soul could ever fathom. Before we descend into this shadow, a brief pause, leave a comment with the number 1 if this genre of true dark tales speaks to you. Your voice helps guide me toward the stories that need to be told. And if you are new to this space, I compel you to subscribe, for we unearth cases that will linger in the quiet hours of your night. Now, let us begin. The world that was in the spring of 2003. Ashley Mitchell was 16 years old, a bloom of a girl living in the suburban serenity of Kettering, Ohio, a place woven from the threads of knowing your neighbors, of children chasing daylight on bicycles until the streetlights hummed to life, a place where evil was never meant to take root. She was one of those girls, the kind who seemed to shimmer with an innate sense of purpose. A junior at Fairfield High, a steady B-plus student, a voice in the choir, a player on the JV basketball team. She possessed a certain light, an energy that drew people into her orbit. Her parents, Thomas and Margaret, had meticulously constructed what they believed to be a fortress of a life, safe and unbreachable. Thomas, an insurance adjuster, provided a life of quiet stability, a steady rhythm, a decent wage. Margaret was a part-time librarian, a keeper of stories at the local elementary school. They had claimed their 3-bedroom house in Kettering back in 1995, planting a maple tree as a sentinel in the front yard and painting Ashley's room a pale, dreamy blue of her own choosing. It was the very portrait of the American dream. 2 cars sleeping in the driveway, a dog named Charlie, and the ritual of family dinners most nights of the week. That spring, Ashley's ambitions were vast, her spirit poised to take on the world. Her nights were spent in the glow of a screen, researching colleges, whispering about a future in journalism, or perhaps photography. She yearned to see beyond the borders of Ohio, to breathe the air of distant cities. The walls of her bedroom were a collage of her Dreams magazine cutouts of Paris, Tokyo, and New York City. With her closest friends, Katie and Rachel, she would spend hours in that sanctuary, spinning futures from thin air, making the kind of promises teenagers make when they believe time is an infinite ocean. She was just so vibrant about turning 17. Margaret would later recount to detectives, her voice a fragile thing. She had this entire birthday party mapped out, a photo scavenger hunt all through town with her friends. That birthday was meant to be April 30th, 2003. It was a day Ashley would never see. The day the world unraveled, April 12th, 2003, a Saturday morning, the kind of spring day that whispers promises it cannot keep convincing you that winter is truly a ghost of the past. The sun was a warm hand on the world, the temperature climbing towards 68 degrees, the trees just beginning to exhale in a haze of green. Ashley drifted downstairs for breakfast around 9:30 a.m., clad in jeans and her favorite green hoodie, her dark hair a simple ponytail at the nape of her neck. "I'm going to meet Katie and Rachel at Fairfield Commons," she announced to her parents, her words casual, as she reached for a bagel. "We're just going to wander the stores, maybe see a movie. I'll be back by 6 for dinner." Thomas glanced up from the morning paper. "Do you have money?" "Yes, Dad. I'm fine." Margaret's gaze fell upon the silver charm bracelet on Ashley's wrist, a gift for her 13th birthday. Through the years, it had become a silver timeline of a life still being written, a miniature basketball, a musical note, a ballet slipper from a childhood dance class, a tiny book. That past Christmas, a mere 4 months ago, Thomas had added the newest charm, a small silver heart delicately engraved with her initials, AM. "That bracelet is getting crowded," Margaret observed with a smile. "We're going to have to get you another one soon." Ashley leaned in and kissed her mother's cheek. "Maybe for my birthday?" She slung her backpack over her shoulder. It held nothing more than a wallet, a tube of lip gloss, her Motorola flip phone, and a pack of gum. At precisely 10:47 a.m., she walked out the front door. Her parents watched as she settled into her 1998 Honda Civic, watched it reverse from the driveway, and saw her raise a hand in a single fleeting wave before she turned onto Maple Street and vanished from their view. It was the last time they would ever see their daughter alive. The unfolding darkness. 6 o'clock arrived and then bled into the evening. There was no sign of Ashley. The house remained silent. The phone did not ring. By 6:30, a thread of dread began to unravel in Margaret's chest. She called Ashley's cell, but the call went straight to the cold, impersonal void of voicemail. She dialed Katie, whose voice was laced with confusion. Katie hadn't spoken to Ashley all day. There had been no plans. Rachel echoed the same story, a note of worry coloring her words. "What do you mean she isn't with you?" Margaret's voice climbed sharp with a dawning terror. "She told me she was meeting you two at the mall." By 7 p.m., Thomas was a phantom in his own car, haunting the sprawling grounds of the Fairfield Commons Mall. He moved through the indifferent currents of shoppers, his daughter's photograph a desperate prayer in his hand. He scoured the vast parking lot, searching for the familiar white of her Honda. There was nothing. Her car was not there. She had not been seen. At 8:15 p.m., Thomas Mitchell crossed the threshold of the Kettering Police Department and spoke the words that made the nightmare real, filing a missing person report. The officer on duty was professional, his demeanor calm, unalarmed. Teenage girls, he explained, often sought solitude, a fight with a boyfriend, a need for space. She would come home. "She doesn't have a boyfriend," Thomas insisted, his hands trembling with a force he couldn't contain. "And she would never run away. My daughter tells us everything. Something is terribly wrong." The officer dutifully recorded the cold, hard facts, the stark arithmetic of a vanishing. Height 5'6", weight 125 pounds, hair long brown, eyes brown, last seen wearing jeans, a green hoodie, white sneakers, a silver charm bracelet on her left wrist, driving a white 1998 Honda Civic. "We'll issue a bolo," the officer stated. "Be on the lookout. If she hasn't surfaced in 24 hours, we will escalate." A sterile acronym for a universe of fear. Thomas and Margaret drove through the ink-black streets of Kettering until 2 a.m., their headlights cutting through a town that had become a foreign landscape of dead ends and shadows. They called every number they could think of friends, teachers, classmates, parents of classmates. Each call was a dead end. No one had seen her. No one knew anything. When the first fragile light of April 13th spilled across the sky, Ashley Mitchell had been missing for 18 hours, and her parents' existence had irrevocably fractured into a waking nightmare. In the comments below, let me know which state or country you are watching from tonight. It is always a profound thing to see where our true crime family gathers. The search begins. By the dawn of Monday, with Ashley still a ghost in her own home, the Kettering Police Department ignited with a frantic urgency. The case fell to Detective William Ramos, a 15-year veteran of the force, a father to 2 daughters of his own. He gazed at the smiling girl in the photograph her parents offered and felt that cold, sinking dread that every detective knows in his bones. This was one of the bad ones. He could feel it in the air. "Walk me through the last time you laid eyes on her." Ramos's voice was low-seated across from Thomas and Margaret in the suffocating quiet of their living room. Every single detail, no matter how small it seems. They retraced the steps of that Saturday morning, a shared bagel, a casual conversation, the glint of a bracelet. Ashley had been a portrait of normalcy, of happiness. No arguments, no shadows at school, no discord among friends. She was meant to meet Katie and Rachel, only she had never breathed a word of it to them. So she was deceptive about her destination. Ramos stated the words, hanging carefully in the air. "No." Margaret's denial was a fortress. "Ashley doesn't lie to us. It must have been a miscommunication or plans shifted, and she simply forgot to tell the girls. But she would never invent a story." Ramos harbored his doubts, but kept them locked behind a professional gaze. The teenage girls built worlds their parents never saw, never. The only question that mattered was why. They summoned the specter of Ashley's cell phone records. Her last call, a whisper at 10:32 that Saturday morning, a 2-minute conversation with Rachel's cell. Rachel confirmed the brief exchange, just Ashley, murmuring she might run late. Nothing to raise an alarm. And after that, the phone went dark. It never hailed another tower, never placed another call. Either its life had expired, or a hand had deliberately snuffed it out. Her car, the white Honda Civic, had vanished as if it were never there. Police alerts bled out across every department in Ohio. They scoured impound lots, descended into parking garages, crawled along forgotten side streets. Nothing. It was as though the earth had opened up and swallowed the car whole. The FBI cast its long shadow over the case after 72 hours, a standard protocol for missing children. Agent Sarah Chen joined the investigation, her presence bringing federal resources and a calm, methodical approach that Thomas and Margaret found both reassuring and utterly terrifying. The FBI's arrival meant this was real. It meant their daughter might be lost to them forever. "We are going to find her," Agent Chen vowed to them, and the conviction in her voice was absolute. But she had navigated these dark waters long enough to know that sometimes the word "finding" held a meaning far from the one a parent's heart begs for. The community awakens. Within a week, Ashley Mitchell's face was a haunting omnipresence. Her image papered telephone poles throughout Kettering, Dayton, and the neighboring counties. Her photograph flickered across the local news each night. Armies of volunteers swept through parks, combed the deep woods, and breached the silence of abandoned buildings. The high school held a vigil, hundreds of students standing in the cold parking lot, a constellation of candles against the darkness, their prayers rising like smoke. Katie and Rachel were shattered. Their best friend had been stolen from their lives, and worse, they were tormented by the feeling that they should have sensed the coming darkness. If only they had called her that morning. If only they had checked in, a relentless chorus of if only, if only, if only. The Mitchell house became the sorrowful epicenter of the search. Detectives moved like ghosts through its halls. Volunteers coordinated their desperate efforts from the driveway. News vans stood sentinel out front. Thomas and Margaret existed in a waking nightmare, barely sleeping food, a forgotten necessity. They kept Ashley's room as a perfect shrine to the moment she left the bed unmade, the laptop open, her green hoodie thrown over a chair. Except she'd been wearing that hoodie. They bought a new one, an identical twin, and placed it there, needing some tangible piece of her to hold on to. Weeks bled into months. Every potential lead was a mirage that shimmered and then vanished. A gas station attendant in Columbus thought he saw her. It was not her. A tip about a girl matching her description in a Cincinnati restaurant, the wrong girl. A psychic reached out, claiming Ashley was captive in a Kentucky basement, a complete fabrication, but they investigated anyway, because in this abyss you follow every flicker of light, no matter how wild. Ashley's 17th birthday arrived a hollow echo of a celebration that would never be. Margaret baked her favorite cake chocolate with vanilla frosting, and they lit the candles, their tiny flames dancing for a girl who wasn't there to blow them out. The photo scavenger hunt never took place. Her friends tried to honor her by posting pictures on MySpace, but the effort felt empty, a sad tribute to a void. By the time summer waned, the daily searches had fallen silent. The news vans had chased other tragedies. The volunteers had returned to the rhythm of their own lives, but for Thomas and Margaret, their search never ceased. Not for a single day. The years of silence. Here is the truth about a missing person case that goes cold. It doesn't just fracture a family. It poisons the soul of a community. Kettering was never the same after Ashley vanished. Parents held their children closer, their grips tighter. Girls were no longer allowed to walk alone. That comfortable myth of suburban safety, the belief that real darkness only lived in the big cities, it was gone forever. Detective Ramos remained tethered to the case even as the years piled up and new tragedies demanded his attention. Every few months he would pull Ashley's file from its crypt, sifting through the pages again and again, hunting for a shadow he might have missed. The FBI's file remained open too, though Agent Chen had long since moved to another field office. New agents would periodically cast a fresh eye upon it, but without new leads, without witnesses, without a shred of evidence, there was nothing left to pursue. Thomas became a ghost at his own job, his presence a mere outline of the man he used to be. He took up smoking again after a decade without it. He began a nightly ritual with too much whiskey, sitting in Ashley's room, staring into her photographs. Margaret fought to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but inside, she was hollowed out. She would see teenage girls in the library and have to flee to the bathroom, ambushed by a sudden violent wave of grief. They sought solace in therapy. They joined support groups, finding themselves among other parents, living the same unending nightmare parents of children who had simply stepped out of the world. Some of those cases found their grim conclusions. A body, discovered a suspect, arrested. Thomas and Margaret were left to wonder which fate was worse. The endless aching void of not knowing, or the crushing certainty of knowing your child was dead. Their marriage nearly crumbled under the weight of it all. How could it not? They were two people drowning in the same sea, clinging to one another for survival, while simultaneously pushing each other under. Every conversation was a winding path that always led back to Ashley. Every holiday was a fresh form of torture. Every time the phone rang, their hearts would seize, praying this was it, the call that would end the torment. But they endured together. Perhaps it was love, or stubbornness, or the shared belief that separating would be the final act of giving up on Ashley. They sold her car, unable to bear the sight of that empty space in the driveway. They packed away most of her belongings, but kept her room untouched, a perfect time capsule of loss. On the anniversary of her disappearance, they held a small memorial in the park. Each year, fewer people came. Life moves on even when yours is frozen in time. By 2010, 7 years had passed into memory. Ashley would have been 23, a college graduate, perhaps embarking on a career, maybe even in love. Instead, she was a name in a frozen case file, a face on a faded poster that no one saw anymore. By 2015, 12 years had gone. The detective who had first carried the weight of the case, William Ramos, had retired. The file was passed to a younger detective, a professional who lacked that burning personal connection. The trail was colder than ice. Whatever happened to Ashley Mitchell on that April morning in 2003 seemed destined to remain a secret buried with the ages. Thomas and Margaret learned to live inside the not knowing. The pain never left, but it settled into a familiar ache, a permanent guest in their bones. You learn to function around it. You adapt. You get out of bed each morning because the only other choice is to let the grief bury you. And then came the chill of February 2020. Tell me in the comments what story you want me to unearth next. I am always listening for the whispers of the cases you want to hear. The bracelet, a silence of 17 years. 17 years of a hollow echo until the fragile piece was shattered by a routine doctor's visit and Margaret's weakness for the ghosts of antique shops. A cardiology checkup had drawn Thomas to Dayton, a simple precaution, a watch set over the quiet murmurs of his heart. It was a Thursday afternoon, steeped in a late winter chill that felt like a premonition, a cold that seeped deep into the bone. Margaret had suggested they make a day of it, lured by the siren call of an estate sale she'd glimpsed online, Murphy's Antiques on Salem Avenue. Just 15 minutes. She had coaxed over breakfast. We're making the drive anyway. It'll be a breath of fresh air, something to take our minds off things. Thomas held no love for dusty relics and silver, tarnished by time, but he acquiesced, for he knew Margaret needed these small harbors from the storm. They both did. After 17 years, you learn that grief is a shadow that never leaves. You only find fleeting moments to step out of its shade. So there he stood a sentinel on the sidewalk outside Murphy's Antiques at 2:30 in the afternoon on the 13th of February, 2020. He was lighting a cigarette, a vice he had slain 3 times since Ashley's disappearance, only to have it rise again. Inside, Margaret was a ghost herself, drifting through displays of depression glass and vintage finery. Thomas was simply trying to build a wall against memory, against thought, against the unending ache. And then his eyes fell upon the shop window. There, nestled between a solemn leather-bound Bible and a cheap cascade of costume jewelry, a glint of silver captured the pale afternoon light. It was a flicker that sent a shard of ice through Thomas's veins before his mind could even name what he was seeing. A bracelet. A silver charm bracelet. The cigarette tumbled from his fingers, forgotten. He drifted toward the glass, his heart a frantic prisoner, beating against the cage of his ribs. The bracelet lay coiled upon a bed of faded blue velvet, its tiny talismans winking at him. A miniature basketball, a musical note, a ballerina's slipper, a book. No, Thomas breathed into the cold air. It can't be. No. But the parade of tiny silver ghosts continued. A small camera, a graduation cap, and a heart, a polished silver heart, that he knew with a soul-deep certainty would bear initials if he could only get closer, if he could just. He burst through the shop door, a tiny bell overhead, shrieking in alarm. An elderly woman behind the counter looked up, her expression startled by the raw force of his entrance. The bracelet, Thomas rasped, his voice a ragged, trembling thing. In the window, the silver one. I have to see it, right now." The woman her name tag identified her as Dorothy Murphy looked bewildered, but moved to retrieve it. "This one. It's a truly lovely piece, sterling silver. Where did you get this?" Thomas interrupted the words, tearing from him as she placed it on the counter. He reached for it with shaking hands, his fingers fumbling as he turned it over, searching for the heart charm. And then he saw them, the letters A.M., etched in a delicate looping script. Ashley Mitchell. His vision swam, the room tilted on an unseen axis. From a million miles away, he could hear Margaret calling his name. But all he could see was this impossible object, this ghost from the past, that had no right to exist. A thing that had vanished 17 years ago from his daughter's wrist. Thomas Margaret was beside him, now her gaze falling to the silver chain, cradled in his hands. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a stark porcelain white. Oh my God, is that? This belonged to my daughter?" Thomas said to Dorothy Murphy, his voice an alien sound in his own ears. "She was wearing this when she was taken 17 years ago. This is evidence in an open case. I need to know where you got it, right now." Dorothy Murphy took a half step back, her hand flying to her chest. "Sir, we acquire our pieces from so many places, estate sales, storage auctions, consignment. I'd have to check my records, then check them." Thomas's voice ripped through the shop's quiet reverence. Other patrons turned their faces masks of curiosity. "My daughter disappeared in 2003, wearing this. She was 16 years old. This is a police matter." Margaret's phone was already in her hand, her trembling fingers dialing 911. Dorothy Murphy looked as if she might faint among her forgotten treasures, and Thomas just stood there, clutching his daughter's bracelet. This tiny silver link to a 17-year-old void, this impossible whisper that meant someone somewhere knew the truth of what had happened to Ashley. The universe had just fractured, and the truth, dark and terrible, was about to pour through the cracks. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to descend into the mystery, because this story is about to spiral into darkness. Officer Chen arrives. It was a matter of pure chance, or perhaps it was fate. Officer Bradley Chen of the Dayton Police Department was simply running his patrol route along Salem Avenue that afternoon. He knew Murphy's Antiques Dorothy was a sweet woman who sometimes called about a pilfered trinket or a suspicious lurker. When he pushed open the door for a routine check-in, he walked into a silent, frozen conflict. A distressed old woman, a middle-aged man clutching a piece of jewelry like a holy relic, and a woman on her phone, weeping. "What's the situation here?" Officer Chen's voice was even, but his hand had already found its way to his belt, not as a threat, but as a familiar grounding presence. Thomas turned toward him, and in the man's eyes, Chen saw the thing he'd learned to recognize over his 6 years on the force, the hollowed-out landscape of a genuine, soul-deep trauma. "My daughter," Thomas said, his voice cracking under the weight of the words. "She disappeared 17 years ago. This is her bracelet. She was wearing it when she vanished. I need your help." Chen drew forth his notepad, a blank slate for a story etched in sorrow. For the next 10 minutes, a flood of memories poured from Thomas, a name, Ashley Mitchell, a date, a scar on the calendar, April 12, 2003, a place, Kettering, Ohio, the hollow ritual of the missing person report, filed with the Kettering PD, the cold, methodical dance of an FBI investigation, the long, silent winter as the case grew cold. And now, this impossible spring, a silver bracelet, a ghost of a memory gleaming in an antique shop window, 60 miles from the last place Ashley had ever been seen. Though youth was etched on Officer Chen's face, a sharp intelligence burned in his eyes. He saw the raw truth in their story, a truth that defied coincidence. The description was a perfect echo. The man could conjure every tiny charm from memory, knew the secret script engraved upon the heart. The woman held a small glowing screen, a digital shrine of photographs their daughter adorned in this very same silver band. His gaze shifted to Dorothy Murphy. "Ma'am." Chen's voice was low, but carried an undeniable weight. "I'm going to need you to consult your records. I need to know the origin of this item. Immediately." A tremor ran through Dorothy as she nodded, vanishing into the shadowed quiet of the back office. Margaret's voice, a lifeline to 911, was a hushed murmur, weaving the impossible tale for a dispatcher. But Thomas remained a statue, his hand of ice around the bracelet, gripped by a primal fear that to release it would be to lose her all over again, to let her slip back into the void. Dorothy returned a heavy ledger and a worn manila folder in her hands, artifacts of a hidden history. It arrived 3 weeks ago, she announced, her fingers tracing lines across the brittle pages. January the 20th, from a storage unit auction. It's how we acquire some of our inventory from the forgotten lives left behind in abandoned units. The name of the facility. Chen pressed his pen, scratching furiously across the page, chasing the first thread of a long unraveled mystery. Secure store on Webster Street, right here in Dayton. The unit, her eyes scanned the notes, was number 247. Our acquisition agent, a man named Gary Webb, he purchased the contents at auction. He brings us these kinds of finds all the time. I'll require Gary Webb's contact information, Chen stated, his tone leaving no room for delay. And the name of the person who originally rented that unit. Dorothy produced a business card for Webb and consulted her papers once more. The unit was registered to a Carl Brewster. The name hung in the air. It was left derelict for nearly 5 years. Payments ceased. The facility sealed it with their own lock, and after all the legal notices were served, its contents were sold to the highest bidder. The scratching of Officer Chen's pen ceased. He raised his eyes to meet the desperate gaze of Thomas and Margaret Mitchell. "I won't mince words with you," he said, his voice somber. "This bracelet is now evidence. It's part of an active investigation. I must take it into my possession as we open a formal case. This will undoubtedly bring in the Kettering PD, and given the history, likely the FBI. We are crossing jurisdictional lines now. Call whoever you must." Thomas's voice was a raw nerve. "I don't care about jurisdictions or procedures. I just want to know what became of my little girl." Before an hour had passed, Murphy's Antiques was transformed. It was a crime scene of a peculiar sort, a yellow ribbon of tape cordoning off not a body, but a memory, a small glass counter where a ghost had reappeared. Detective Amanda Vickers of the Dayton PD's Major Crimes Unit stepped through the door, and with a single sweeping glance, she felt the ground shift beneath her. She knew with a chilling certainty that this small tremor was about to become an earthquake. Her first call was to a ghost of his own detective, William Ramos, in Kettering. He had turned in his badge 5 years prior, but the specter of Ashley Mitchell's case still haunted his quiet retirement, whispering to him every few months. When his phone pierced the silence of that Thursday afternoon and Vickers' voice painted a picture of what they had found, Ramos felt a jolt in his chest, a heart that had forgotten how to beat so fast. "I'm on my way," was all he said, the words a promise, as he reached for his coat. Retirement was a title, not a state of being. This was his case. She was his missing girl, and after 17 years of desolate silence, a single clear note had finally broken through. Tracing the silver thread. The ensuing 48 hours became a maelstrom of procedure and purpose. The bracelet, now a sacred relic, was photographed from every angle, its existence meticulously documented before being whisked away for forensic communion, a search for the invisible story, told by fingerprints, by DNA, by any lingering trace of life. Thomas and Margaret revisited their grief, giving statements that were less testimony and more incantation, proving the bracelet belonged to Ashley. They offered up ghosts from 2002 and 2003, frozen moments, in photographs, where she wore it a silver glint on her wrist. They spoke of the secret words carved into the heart charm. There was no doubt. It was hers. And so began the impossible task to follow its dark and silent journey back through time. Gary Webb, the agent of acquisition for Murphy's Antiques, sat under the stark lights of an interview room at the Dayton Police Department. A nervous energy radiated from him, the cooperative witness who feared he'd unwittingly trafficked in stolen sorrow. The detectives were quick to soothe his fears. He was a guide, not a suspect. "It's a world I live in the storage unit auctions," Webb explained, his voice gaining confidence. "When the rent stops and the lives inside are forgotten, the facilities clear them out. I place my bid, I buy the lot, and I sift through the remnants for anything of value to sell to the shops. It's a business of ghosts, you could say." "The Carl Brewster unit," Detective Vickers prompted, her voice a quiet command. "Tell us about that one." Webb's thumbs danced across his phone screen, summoning the digital record. "Here it is, Secure Store, Webster Street, Unit 247. The auction was January 18th, 2020. My winning bid was $300. It was a typical haul, some tired furniture, boxes of clothes, old tools, the usual detritus of a life." I spent a day picking through it, and in a small wooden box nestled with some other trinkets, I found the bracelet. It had the look of sterling, so I brought it to Dorothy. Anything out of the ordinary? Vickers pressed. Anything about that unit that struck you as wrong? Webb paused his gaze, turning inward. Now that you mention it, yes. The place was a chaotic jumble, as if everything had been tossed inside in a blind panic. Nothing labeled, just heaps of belongings. And there was a smell, a heavy, cloying odor. Mildew for sure, but mixed with something else. Something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It made me want to leave and not look back. Across the table, Detective Ramos, now a consultant, drawn back into the fray, felt a familiar cold knot form in his stomach. The odor, the frantic disarray, the long abandonment, the pieces were beginning to form a chilling mosaic. The records from Secure Store told a story of their own. Unit 247 was rented in June of 2003, a mere 2 months after Ashley Mitchell vanished from the world. The renter, Carl Brewster, had paid in cash and provided a Dayton address. For years, the payments arrived like clockwork, until 2015, when they abruptly ceased. The facility's attempts to reach him were met with a wall of silence, letters unanswered, calls unreturned. In the end, they chained the door with a new lock and began the slow legal march toward auction. "Find me Carl Brewster," Vickers commanded, her voice sharp as glass. "Now." His name echoed through the digital halls of every conceivable database. Carl Michael Brewster, born 1955, a Caucasian male. His driver's license pointed to a house in Dayton, but when officers arrived, they found only a derelict shell, a place that hadn't known life in years. Neighbors, their memories hazy, recalled Brewster leaving sometime around 2015. His destination was a mystery. They delved into the paper trail of his life employment records, tax filings, lines of credit. The trail ended abruptly in 2015. It was as if on some unremarkable day, Carl Brewster had simply evaporated from the face of the earth, or been swallowed by it. And then a whisper, from the one place they hadn't yet looked, the county coroner's office. Carl Michael Brewster had drawn his last breath on March 3rd, 2019, almost a full year ago. His life had been extinguished not by violence, but by a failing liver and the slow poison of alcohol. He had faded away in a desolate rooming house on Dayton's east side, a meager disability check his only anchor. In death, as in his final years, he was utterly alone, no funds for a proper burial, no family to mourn his passing. He now rested in a pauper's grave, his secrets buried with him in the cold, anonymous earth of the county cemetery. A dead end. A junior detective murmured the words, swallowed by the silence. But a slow shake of Ramos's head cut through the air. "No, the storage unit. That's our next move. If he kept her bracelet, what other secrets did he lock away?" The Shadow Box, Secure Store on Webster Street, was a monument to forgotten things. A grid of orange doors under the unblinking eyes of security cameras, all caged in by chain link. Detective Vickers secured the warrant, as if by sheer will, and by the dawn of Friday, a full forensic team stood like sentinels before Unit 247. Thomas and Margaret ached to be there, a desperate plea in their voices. But Vickers extinguished that hope with a single firm refusal. "If this is what I believe it to be, a crime scene, your presence is an impossibility," she explained, her voice a careful balance of steel and silk. "I give you my word, the moment we uncover anything, you will be the first to know. But for now, you must let us walk this path alone." So the Mitchells were exiled to a sterile hotel room in Dayton, their hands locked together adrift in a sleepless, breathless purgatory. After 17 years of silence, answers might lie dormant behind that cold orange door. But what truths would they awaken? That was the terror that coiled in the dark. Detective Ramos stood shoulder to shoulder with Vickers as the manager's bolt cutters bit through the lock. The door protested, with a shriek of tortured metal rolling upward to exhale a cloud of stale, forgotten air, the scent of years sealed in darkness. High-powered beams sliced through the gloom, painting the scene in stark relief. The space was a 10 by 10 foot tomb of discarded life. Furniture lay in a chaotic jumble. Cardboard boxes sagged with age, their tape brittle and yellowed. Bloated garbage bags slumped against a rolled carpet, a silent serpent in the corner. Tools were strewn about like fallen soldiers, and a lone mattress sagged against the wall, a witness to emptiness. Capture every shadow, every speck of dust, before a single thing is disturbed," Vickers commanded, her voice cutting through the stale air. The team moved with a practiced, solemn grace, documenting and cataloging each artifact. Most of it was the mundane detritus of a life, mildewed clothes, fractured furniture, unremarkable tools. But amidst the chaos, a few containers stood apart. Not cardboard, but heavy-duty plastic bins, sealed with an unnerving precision. They breached the first seal. Inside, a time capsule of a young woman's life. Jeans, hoodies, t-shirts, all small, styles frozen in the early 2000s. A cold dread plummeted through Ramos, a stone in a bottomless well. The second bin held the soul of a life interrupted. Notebooks filled with silent words. CDs of forgotten anthems make up a lifeless Motorola flip phone. A backpack, heavy with ghosts. And there, folded in the darkness, a green hoodie. "Preserve it all." Vickers whispered the order, a ghost in the small room. Every last piece. They pressed on, unsealing more bins, revealing more layers of a stolen youth. Each item, a piece of clothing, a personal effect, cried out for its owner. A young woman whose life had been plundered. And then, in the deepest recess of the unit, hidden beneath the coiled carpet, they found a large black bag bound shut with the grim finality of duct tape. The technician who sliced it open made a sound, not a gasp, but the hollow thud of air forced from a man's lungs. Nestled inside were bones, human, small, cradled in the decaying threads of what was once clothing, now a shroud of rot. Detective Vickers retreated from the tomb-like space, her first call to the coroner. Then with trembling hands, she found Thomas Mitchell's number, the screen a blur before her eyes. The reckoning. Thomas snatched the phone on the first ring, his voice a raw nerve. "Have you found something?" Vickers drew a steadying breath, a ritual that never dulled the coming pain. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you and your wife to come to the Dayton Police Department. We've discovered remains in the unit. We'll need dental records for a positive identification, but I am so very sorry. I believe we've found Ashley." The sound that tore from Thomas's throat was not human, a terrible alchemy of a sob and a scream. Margaret wrenched the phone from his grasp. "Are you certain?" Her voice was a hollow echo from a distant place. "Is there any doubt at all? The forensic analysis is underway, but we've recovered numerous personal effects that align with what Ashley had on her last day. The green hoodie, a backpack. We will need you to look at some of these things if you are able. My little girl." The words fractured on Margaret's lips, the question too terrible to complete. "She has been gone a very long time." Vickers answered, her voice a soft current of sorrow. "I am so sorry." They knew. In that silent, secret place in the heart, of course, they knew. After 17 years, a parent knows. But knowing is a shadow, and confirmation is the blade. For nearly 2 decades, Thomas and Margaret had drifted in the cruel limbo between hope and despair. Now the waiting was over. Their daughter was gone, and had been most likely since the very first day she vanished into the air. Within the cold heart of the police department, a quiet space was carved out for them, a sanctuary of compassion. They were offered a private room, the solace of coffee and water, a box of tissues for tears that had not yet fallen. Detective Ramos sat with them, a constant presence, the man whose concern for their lost girl had never waned. "We will unearth what happened." Ramos vowed, his voice a steady anchor in their storm. "Carl Brewster's story has ended, but a secret remains. These storage units do not rent themselves. Someone sealed Ashley's fate inside that place. Tell me every shadow you've uncovered about Carl Brewster." Thomas set his voice a desolate plain, stripped of all emotion. The well of his grief had run dry, leaving only a thirst for answers. They summoned Brewster's ghost from a digital file. Carl Michael Brewster, 64 years, etched on his face when he died. A lifelong resident of Dayton's forgotten corners. Twice divorced, leaving no children to carry his name. A life of intermittent construction work, mostly intermittent. A string of DUIs and assault charges that dissolved like smoke, all fueled by a chronic thirst. He lived as a phantom and died in penniless solitude. Was there any thread connecting him to Kettering? Margaret whispered. Any whisper of a reason for him to be where Ashley vanished? That was the question that hung in the air, a phantom worth $1 million. They delved deeper, excavating the ruins of Brewster's life. Employment records revealed a roofing company its reach, sprawling across the Dayton metropolitan area, its shadow falling even upon Kettering. In April of 2003, that company had been mending the roof of a strip mall not far from Fairfield Commons. He was breathing the same air. Vickers stated the words, chilling the room. He could have laid eyes on Ashley that very morning. But a dissonance echoed in Ramos's gut. Brewster was a creature of the bottle, yes, but his record was barren of violence against women void of the predatory stains of assault or stalking. And the tomb-like storage unit it spoke of, haste of a panicked scramble to bury a secret, not the cold calculation of a planned abduction. What if Brewster wasn't the monster who took her? Ramos mused the words, emerging slowly. What if he was merely the keeper of her tomb, guarding it for someone else? If this labyrinth of shadows holds you captive, let us know. Remain with us, for the descent into madness has only just begun. And her name was Diana Martinez. The truth began to stir from an unexpected grave, the memory of Carl Brewster's ex-girlfriend. Diana Martinez had not let the ghost of Carl haunt her thoughts for years. Their time together in the early 2000s was less a romance and more a shared spiral, his drinking a mirror for her own. It was a toxic dance, the kind you perform when you're too lost in your own darkness to see the poison. They had fractured in 2004, and sobriety had been Diana's resurrection. She had since forged a quiet life, a manager at a grocery store, a small apartment 3 years since alcohol had passed her lips. Then his name flickered across her television screen, a curse spoken aloud. Storage unit, with human remains connected to missing girl case, and a glacial winter seized her blood. For in that moment a memory clawed its way out of a 17-year-old grave, a memory she had long dismissed as a drunken nightmare. She called the tip line. Within 2 hours, she was staring into the past, sitting across a table from Detective Vickers at the Dayton Police Department. I don't know if this is anything, Diana began, her voice a fragile tremor, her hands a cage around a styrofoam cup. But back in June of 2003, a call came for Carl in the dead of night. We were at his place, both adrift in a sea of booze. The phone shrieked around 2 in the morning. He answered, and I saw a change in him, a fear. He stepped outside to speak, returning 20 minutes later, wearing the face of a man who had seen a ghost. Did he tell you who it was? Vickers pressed. His cousin, Marcus something. I only met him once, a man made of cold edges and unsettling quiet. He gave me the creeps. I could tell Carl was terrified of him. Marcus was the type who lived in the shadows of some scheme, always tangled in something ugly. And what followed the phone call? Diana drew a shuddering breath. Carl said he had to go help Marcus. Family business. He called it, promising he'd be back in a few hours, but this is the part that never left me. He took his truck, and when he returned with the dawn, the truck bed was shrouded by a tarp, hiding some heavy burden. He wouldn't let me near it. He just told me to go home, that he had something to handle. Did you see him again after that night? Yes, a few days later. He was a man haunted, paranoid as hell. He kept muttering that Marcus had trapped him in something awful, that the water was rising over his head. That was the week he rented the storage unit, I know, because he made me drive him to Secure Store to sign the lease. His license was suspended from a DUI. A current of adrenaline shot through Vickers. Did he ever say what he was locking away? No, but he was obsessed with the payments, insisting on cash every month. He even set up automatic withdrawals to ensure the rent was never ever late. I asked him once what was so damned important in there. He looked at me, his eyes dark, and said just one word, insurance, in case Marcus ever tries to screw me. Insurance. Vickers repeated the word, hanging in the air like gunpowder. You mean leverage? Diana nodded her gaze, sharp, with the clarity of sobriety. That's what I pieced together later, when my head was clear. Carl was holding a weapon over Marcus's head. Something so terrible that Marcus couldn't risk letting it see the light of day. They had to find this phantom, Marcus. The name was a key. They searched for Marcus Brewster, a name they assumed was tied by blood. But the file that materialized bore a different name, Marcus David Holloway, born 1970, Carl Brewster's cousin linked by his mother's bloodline. And as his record unspooled across the screen, the shattered pieces of the mystery began to grind into place. His history was a dark tapestry of assault, theft, and drunken rampages. Then in 2005, a deeper stain appeared, an investigation into a sexual assault. The accuser, a teenage girl. The charges were later dropped, her story recanted into a whisper of a mistake. Reading the file, Ramos felt a sickness coil in his stomach. You could see the pressure in the margins of the follow-up notes, the ghost of a truth that had been bullied into silence. Ramos's voice was like ice. Where is Marcus Holloway now? A search unearthed his current life's coordinates. Marcus resided in Springfield, Ohio, a journey of some 45 minutes from Dayton. His days were spent in the metallic scent of an auto body shop, a divorced man, a father to one daughter. On the surface, he was a portrait of the ordinary, but Detective Vickers knew a truth etched in the grim annals of her career. Monsters seldom wear their true faces. We need to draw him into our world, she decreed, her voice low, but with a delicate hand. We don't possess enough for a warrant. We need him to speak. The crucible of words. Marcus Holloway crossed the threshold on a Monday morning, lured by the pretense of routine questions concerning his departed cousin, Carl. He arrived of his own accord, a clever move, as refusal would have cast a long shadow of suspicion. He took his seat across from Detectives Vickers and Ramos in the sterile heart of the Dayton PD. A man of 50, now his frame heavy as hair, a thinning crown, cloaked in the simple armor of jeans and a work shirt. A tremor of nerves was visible, but the innocent and the guilty alike tremble in such rooms. We appreciate you coming in, Marcus. Vickers began, her voice a silken thread in the tense air. We're merely tying up the final threads of your cousin Carl's estate. Carl possessed no estate. Marcus stated, a cold finality in his tone. The man left this world with empty pockets. Indeed, but he did maintain a storage unit. Does that place conjure any memories? A shrug, a gesture of hollow indifference. Carl collected mountains of junk. It's no surprise he'd need a place to bury it. The thing is, Vickers' voice lowered a subtle shift as she leaned into the space between them. We discovered certain interesting artifacts in that unit. Artifacts that once belonged to a 16-year-old girl who vanished in the year 2003. Her gaze was an anchor holding him fast, and then she saw it. A flicker in the calm waters of his composure, a tremor of fear before the mask of stone slid back into place. I know nothing of what you speak, Marcus replied, his voice a flat line. Now that's a curious thing, Ramos interjected, his voice weaving into the narrative. Because we spoke with Carl's former flame, Diana. She recalls a phone call that shattered the quiet of a June night in 2003. A call from you. Carl vanished into the darkness, only to return with his truck bed shrouded, and soon after the storage unit was rented. That is a truly remarkable coincidence. Diana was lost in a bottle. Marcus countered, his tone dismissive. I wouldn't place my faith in a single word, she utters. She has walked the path of sobriety for 16 years now. Vickers retorted, her words sharp. Her memory is a clear, untroubled spring. She is a credible witness. A profound silence descended. Marcus's gaze fell to the cold, unyielding surface of the table. Allow me to paint a picture for you. Ramos began, his tone a quiet storm. I believe something went terribly wrong in April of 2003. I believe you called your cousin Carl, your voice laced with panic. I believe Carl helped you conceal something or someone, and then he held on to that evidence in a rented tomb as a form of insurance, because Carl may have had his demons, but he was no fool. He knew you could sacrifice him, so he kept his leverage. You are weaving fictions from thin air, Marcus hissed. We hold the mortal remains of Ashley Mitchell. Vickers stated the words, falling like stones into a silent pool. We have her most personal possessions. We have the unblinking eye of forensic science. We are going to tether this darkness to you, Marcus. The only remaining question is whether you choose to cooperate now, or if we must forge this chain without you. Either path leads to the same destination. A vice seemed to grip his jaw. A cold dew bloomed on his brow. Beneath the table, his leg began a frantic dance, the body's primal scream for escape. I require legal counsel. He uttered at last the words, a surrender. And so, the curtain fell. They had pressed him to the very edge of the precipice. Now the arduous task of building an unbreakable case began. Share this unfolding shadow with a fellow seeker of truth, for the descent into this case has only just begun. Forging the chains. The whispers from the lab were a damning chorus. Ashley's remains were confirmed through the silent testimony of dental records. It was without question her. The medical examiner spoke of the cause of her final breath, blunt force trauma to the head. A violent blow had stolen her life, likely in an instant. Her form, shrouded in plastic, had waited in that silent tomb for 17 long years, and there, amidst the relics of a stolen life, lay her cell phone. The forensic team, through a miracle of modern science, managed to coax data from its long slumber. Her last received call was logged at 10:32 in the morning on April the 12th, 2003, the conversation with Rachel, a fact they already knew. But there was something more. A ghost of a message, a partial text that had never been sent. It lingered in her drafts folder. "Help someone following me on." The words hung in the digital ether, a final desperate plea that never found its voice. A message left unfinished, a warning never sent. They delved into the archives of the past, sifting through the toll records of April 2003, searching for a phantom vehicle that might have journeyed from Kettering to Dayton on that fateful day. It was a faint hope. 17 years had passed, and the records of that era were far from complete. And in the dust of forgotten days, a ghost emerged. Marcus Holloway's truck had passed through a toll booth on I-75, heading south at 11:43 in the morning on April the 12th, 2003. A single silent hour had bled away since Ashley's final desperate plea for help vanished into the ether. They cast a net back through time, re-interviewing every soul who had known Marcus in the year 2003. Whispers from the past emerged from his co-workers at the body shop. They recalled a personal day on April 12th for some vague family matter. He had returned on April 15th, a changed man, haunted and jumpy. One man's memory held a chilling detail, a fresh scratch marring Marcus's face, the silent testament of a struggle. The prosecutor's office meticulously wove together the threads of the past. Until the tapestry was undeniable, they had enough to demand his arrest. On the 5th of March, 2020, the ghost of the past materialized at Marcus Holloway's door. He was taken from his home in Springfield, Ohio, the heavy chains of justice finally closing around him, charged with the kidnapping and murder of Ashley Mitchell. The reckoning. The trial commenced in the autumn air of September 2020. A relentless pandemic had cast its long shadow, delaying justice and deepening the agony for Thomas and Margaret. But at long last, they took their seats in the solemn courtroom, their hearts steeled, waiting to finally hear the unvarnished truth of their daughter's fate. The prosecution began to paint their grim portrait, Marcus Holloway working construction near the Fairfield Commons Mall in April of 2003. His eyes had fallen upon Ashley that morning, a vision of youth, beauty, and solitude. He became her shadow. As a cold dread washed over her, she tried to text for help, a message he violently intercepted before it could ever be sent. The state's theory unfolded a chilling narrative of those lost moments. Marcus, they argued, had forced Ashley into the confines of his truck. Perhaps his intent was a violation, perhaps merely to terrorize. But Ashley, fueled by a primal will to survive, fought back. In the violent struggle, her nails found his face, and then he struck her a brutal final blow, perhaps with a fist, perhaps with a heavy tool from his truck. And in that instant, her light was extinguished. Consumed by a rising panic, Marcus made a single call to the one soul he believed he could trust, his cousin Carl. Together they performed their grim task, wrapping Ashley's lifeless form and placing it in the bed of the truck. At Carl's place, they systematically erased her, stripping away her clothes, her backpack, her phone, and entombed every last trace of her life in a cold rented storage unit. But one piece remained: the bracelet. Marcus kept it. Was it a sickening trophy or a forgotten trinket? In the end, it too was surrendered to Carl, to be hidden away with all the other secrets. The defense fought back, attempting to fracture the timeline and cast doubt upon the forensic tapestry, even painting Carl as the true monster. Yet the circumstantial evidence formed an unbreakable chain. The toll records, the phantom phone call, the telling scratch, the convenient day off from work. Every link pointed inexorably to Marcus. And then, from the silent depths of the past, a bombshell erupted. Another witness stepped from the shadows. Her name was Jennifer Harrison. In 2003, she had been a girl of 18, working a lonely shift at a gas station on the route between Kettering and Dayton. The news of the trial had reached her, and in the recesses of her mind, a dormant memory clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "I remember this truck pulling in," she testified, her voice clear and steady. "April of 2003, around noon. The driver was acting strange, nervous. He asked for the restroom key and stayed in there for maybe 15 minutes. When he came out, he had scratches on his face that weren't there before. I remember thinking he'd been in a fight, but he had this look in his eyes, like he was scared, guilty. And from a silent lineup of photographs, her finger fell upon the face of Marcus Holloway. "Did you see anyone else with him?" The prosecutor's voice cut through the stillness. "I looked in his truck bed while he was inside," Jennifer said. "There was a tarp covering something. I saw a hand sticking out from under it. A small hand. I told myself it was a mannequin because the alternative was unthinkable. But that image has haunted me. When I saw this case on the news, I realized the horror of what I'd actually seen." A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the courtroom as Thomas's hand found Margaret's, a silent anchor in a storm of grief. Marcus's defense tried to discredit her. Why wait 17 years? Why not call the police in 2003? But her testimony held a chilling specificity, an unshakable credibility. It fit the timeline perfectly. The unsealed truth. In the third week of the trial, the narrative took a turn no one could have foreseen. The lawyer who had handled Carl Brewster's estate came forward holding a letter sent from beyond the grave. Carl had penned it in 2018, a year before his death, as his own life was ebbing away. He had sealed it and given it to his lawyer with a solemn command. If anything ever happens regarding that storage unit, this needs to be given to the police. The letter was not a plea, nor a defense. It was a confession. Within its pages, Carl unburdened his soul. Marcus had called him in the dead of night on April 12, 2003, around 2 in the morning. He'd said he'd messed up bad. Carl had driven to a desolate wooded area outside Dayton where Marcus was parked, and in the truck bed lay Ashley's body. Marcus claimed it was an accident. He'd seen a pretty girl tried to offer her a ride. When she refused, something inside him snapped. He followed her, grabbed her, forced her into his truck. She fought. He hit her, and then she stopped moving. Carl confessed his own part in the sin he helped dispose of the evidence. Not the body that was left in the storage unit, but Ashley's car. They drove it to a chop shop. Marcus knew where it was stripped for parts and crushed into oblivion. It was why it had vanished from the earth. "I knew it was wrong," Carl's words cried out from the page. "I knew I should have called the cops. But Marcus was family, and I was weak. I've lived with this guilt every day for 17 years. I deserve whatever hell is waiting for me. But that girl deserves justice. Her family deserves to know. Marcus Holloway killed Ashley Mitchell, and I helped him hide it. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." As the final sorrowful words of the letter echoed in the court, the fate of Marcus Holloway was irrevocably sealed. The jury deliberated for a mere 3 hours. They found him guilty on all counts, kidnapping, murder in the first degree, and tampering with evidence. At sentencing, the judge's words fell like the slam of a vault door, condemning him to life without the possibility of parole. Let the echoes of your thoughts resound below. Was this a true reckoning? Or does the shadow of justice fall short in the silence? After the gavel's fall, from the front pew, Thomas and Margaret watched the specter of their nightmare, Marcus, be led away, bound in steel. His gaze met theirs for a fleeting, singular moment. And in those depths, Thomas perceived not the ghost of remorse, but something akin to a profound weariness, as if he too had shouldered the crushing burden of those 17 years. Yet no well of sympathy stirred within Thomas. This creature had devoured their daughter's future, had stolen 17 years of sunlight, and had condemned them to an unending torment. Whatever cross Marcus bore, it was one of his own making. Beyond the courthouse doors, a tempest of reporters converged. Thomas, a stoic figure in the storm, delivered the words they had carefully etched onto paper. Ashley was a girl of 16 summers, a soul of light and kindness, brimming with life. Today she should be 33. She should have walked across a graduation stage, forged a path for herself, perhaps cradled a child of her own. Instead, for 17 years, she was lost to a cold, dark space, all because one man chose violence. No judgment can return her to us. But the knowing has finally come. Now we can give her the peace she was so long denied. Our gratitude to every soul who kept her memory alive, who never ceased their search. They laid Ashley to rest on a brilliant October morning beneath the sprawling arms of Woodland Cemetery in Kettering. The cherry tree chosen to watch over her was shedding its crimson leaves, a quiet preparation for the coming winter. A silent congregation of hundreds, gathered kin companions and the unseen family of strangers who had walked this path with them. Katie and Rachel, now women in their 30s with families of their own, spoke of the friend who remained forever young. In the breathless hope of high school, we swore we would be friends for all of time. Rachel's voice fractured with tears. Ashley, she honored that vow. She has never truly left our side, and she never will. As the small white vessel descended into the earth, Margaret offered a final tribute, a single yellow rose the color of Ashley's laughter. Thomas held his wife a silent anchor in a sea of sorrow, and for the first time in 17 years, the suffocating weight of the unknown lifted from his soul. The ache remained a phantom limb of grief that would never fade, but the torturous void of uncertainty had been filled. At long last, Ashley was home. A legacy forged in memory. In the hollow months that followed the verdict, Thomas and Margaret transmuted their grief into a powerful force for change. From the ashes of their loss rose the Ashley Mitchell Foundation, a beacon for families adrift in the same nightmare, and a patron of the very science that had brought them their answers. If this long winter has taught us anything, Margaret's voice resonated at the Foundation's inception, it is that hope cannot be extinguished. For 17 years we kept a vigil. We never surrendered our faith. And then a single bracelet emerged from the darkness, and the world shifted on its axis. Justice may travel a slow and winding road, but it is a destination worth the pilgrimage. The Foundation became a bridge, connecting law enforcement agencies to modernize the archives of the lost. They poured resources into the intricate science of forensic genealogy, the same key that unlocked other frozen histories. They became a lifeline for families offering the means to hire their own searchers, to take the time away from work that the desperate hunt for a loved one demands. Thomas, in turn, became a voice for the vanished youth, championing a new urgency in how their disappearances are handled. He spoke against the dangerous assumption of runaway, a label that too often stills the hand of action. Ashley's story might have ended differently sooner, had the clock not been allowed to tick so freely in those first crucial 48 hours. Every tick of the clock is a lifetime. Thomas implored a gathering of officers. Cast aside assumption. Erase hesitation. In every face, on every poster, see the reflection of your own child. The echoes she left behind. This narrative, Ashley's legacy, is a tapestry woven with hard-won truths. This is not a sermon, but a stark and unvarnished chronicle of what was learned in the dark. Heed the whispers of your intuition. That primal sense of unease is a guardian. Ashley felt the shadow fall behind her. She reached for help, a silent scream into the digital ether. She knew. Never betray that inner sentinel. Remain a conscious observer in your own world, especially when you walk the path alone. Let your gaze sweep the landscape. Acknowledge the figures that share your space. If a shadow clings too closely, do not lead it to your sanctuary. Flee to the light of the crowd, raise your voice, and refuse to be invisible. Leave a map of your intentions. Always, though it may feel a mundane chore, let someone know the coordinates of your journey. Had Ashley's parents held the true itinerary of her mourning, if one even existed beyond the veil of what happened, the search for her might have begun on a different, more illuminated path. When you witness a tear in the fabric of the ordinary, you must give it a voice. In 2003, Jennifer Harrison glimpsed a human hand beneath a canvas shroud and dismissed it as a pale imitation of life. That silence became a ghost that haunted her for 17 years. If a scene strikes a dissonant chord, sound the alarm. Let the guardians of order decipher the truth. To the parents, be an anchor in your children's lives, not with a chain of control, but with a lifeline of love that whispers, "You are precious, and I want you safe." Know the constellations of their friendships, the familiar rivers of their daily routes, the unique rhythms of their lives. This is not born of mistrust, but from the stark knowledge that monsters like Marcus Holloway walk among us. And finally, never surrender hope. For 17 years, the Mitchells tended to a flame in the darkest of nights. They stood in vigils, they spoke her name to the wind, they refused to let the embers of her case grow cold. And in the end, The light broke through. Justice may slumber, but it does not die. Epilogue. 3 winters have passed since Marcus Holloway was sealed away from the world. 3 years have turned since Ashley Mitchell was at last brought home to rest. Thomas and Margaret remain in the heart of Kettering, having found a smaller sanctuary, a home now closer to the quiet hill where their daughter sleeps. Every week a pilgrimage of love. Margaret brings blossoms to Ashley's stone, the sun-kissed yellow of roses in their season, the bright faces of sunflowers in summer, the deep hues of chrysanthemums in the autumn air. From Ashley's memory, a light now shines. Her foundation has illuminated the path for 5 other lost souls. 3 were returned to the warmth of their families, their stories reclaimed from the void. For 2, the return was a somber one, but it brought the solace of closure. It brought answers. It brought them home. Each year when the calendar turns to the 12th of April, the day the world went quiet, Katie and Rachel make their way to Ashley's side. They bring with them their own children, a new generation, who never felt her touch, but who carry the weight and grace of her story, who know her memory, who understand that she mattered profoundly. Detective William Ramos, his official duties now behind him, lends his time and his wisdom to the foundation. He speaks to the young guard of detectives, imparting the most vital lesson of his career, that a case is never truly closed in the heart, even when the file is consigned to the cold silence of a storage room. And the bracelet, Ashley's silver litany of charms, a tiny basketball, a musical note, a ballet slipper, a book, a camera, a graduate's cap, and a heart engraved with AM. It rests now in the cold vault of an evidence locker at the Dayton Police Department. In time, when all legal echoes have faded, it will return to her family. But for now, it remains where it is the silent witness that unraveled a 17-year-old mystery. Not all tales find their solace in a happy ending. Ashley Mitchell will never return. She will never graduate, never gaze upon foreign shores, never lose herself in love, never live the life that was stolen from her. Marcus Holloway extinguished that future, taking it from her family, from every soul who cherished her. But her story is not solely a narrative of loss. It is one of endurance, of a love that refused to be silenced. It is about parents who would not let their daughter dissolve into a mere statistic, about a community that held her memory like a sacred flame, about a justice that, though it slumbered for 17 years, finally awoke. Ashley Mitchell was 16 years of age when she was taken from this world. But her resonance, her memory, her foundation, the changes enacted in her name, that is a force destined to last forever. Rest in the quiet, Ashley. Your family brought you home. Before we close this chapter, tell me in the comments which shadow you want us to step into next. We unearth the cold cases that finally thaw, the mysteries that surrender their secrets, and the families whose hope never dies. This is the true crime that matters, not just the anatomy of horror, but the persistence of hope. If you've walked with us this far, you are part of this vigil. Join our circle with that subscribe button. Honor the fight with a like, and I'll see you in the next story. Stay safe out there. The world can be a dark place, but it is also filled with people who will never stop fighting for the light. Peace be with you.